So my name is Arrowyn. My pronouns are she and hers, and I live in Northeast Los Angeles on unceded Tongva territory. And I just will do a really brief intro about my relationship to recovery. I have been in recovery, for the majority of my adult life, pretty much starting at about 30 years old. I'm 48 now, so it's a long time, and had a lot of experiences in different modalities. And we'll just say I'm also a single mom of a 10-year-old daughter. And I'm on staff at Loomis Transforms and part of the Resilience Toolkit certification team. And so a lot of the big push, the big reason I was excited to offer this workshop was because when I got certified in the Resilience Toolkit, our signature workshop, it was so transformative for not only my life and my parenting and my partnering and all that, but it also inspired me to get certified. And I did. And when I got certified, the certification is such an incredibly transformative experience in and of itself. But what it showed me when I went back to recovery after the certification, I realized there were three main elements missing from most recovery modalities that I was aware of. And that was first an embodied approach. So really looking at how complex PTSD and some developmental and relational trauma and young adult trauma, all that can add to a very sort of dysregulated nervous system, meaning there's a lot of discomfort in the body. And a lot of us aren't taught that we actually have internal resources to mitigate that in small doses. And so everything was an external, it was either go to a meeting or talk to your sponsor or do this or do that. And all of that is very helpful. I'm not saying to take away from that, but that embodied approach was radically transformed my experience of recovery completely. It felt like this kind of holistic sort of approach. The second piece was a trauma-informed awareness, which, as I mentioned, when you have experienced trauma, which most of us have, I really don't know anyone who hasn't yet, God bless them. But there is a direct correlation to that sort of dysregulation and then kind of seeking regulation at any cost. So really missing that piece of the why and really looking at like how that informs the now. And then the last piece was social justice, just really understanding in a really profound way that we are not okay until all of us are okay. And the hyper individualization of a lot of the recovery modalities missed for me this idea of community, in terms of community helping to advocate for changing systems, because a lot of people will experience that dysregulation. They might go into a space and have a sense of soothing, whether that's a rehabilitation center. I have many, that's a lot of thoughts about that, but you can take people out of their world for a certain time. And yes, they might feel regulated, but when they go back into that world, if we're looking at a lot of issues of racialized capitalism, and certain things, we're really missing a big part of it's that analogy of we're catching these babies as they're coming down river, but nobody's going up and saying like, why are all these babies being put in the river? So that was sort of the three ideas that I was really inspired to bring to the recovery community and base it all in the recovery toolkit or the resilience toolkit. So that's how this whole thing was born. And I've been doing it now. I've been running this workshop for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years, maybe. Yeah, like almost 2 years. And really just seeing so many exciting experiences of people being able to really understand themselves better and be able to have a lot of self-agency and efficacy. We have a very broad definition of recovery in this space, and you actually get to define it for yourself. And I've had people show up with, sometimes people have shown up and like, I signed up for this, but I'm kind of like, why am I here? And then they're like, oh, one person, I read romance novels too much, and it sounds funny, but it's not, because it was causing them a lot of suffering. They weren't taking care of themselves. And, it's the same thing we all know. It's the whack-a-mole. I get rid of one thing, but then how do you also deal with things that you can't be abstinent from, right? That's something I'm really interested in too. So I feel like all of these behaviors or substance use are really driven by shame. And so I know in recovery spaces, one of the greatest healing things is being able to, like Brene Brown says, shame can't exist in the light, right? It really only grows in the darkness. So really being able to have a space where you feel like you can talk about that and be curious about it and say, so that's the space of the toolkit for recovery. It's a very curiosity driven space where we're always kind of just asking a lot of questions and trying a lot of different things. And I'm the expert on the toolkit, but I'm by no means the expert on you or your body or your experience. So it's a very collaborative space. It's a lot of us working together. And what I love about it being a group is that people, to their comfort level, and some people never share what they're working with at all, but there's a lot of, you choose how much you want to share, but it is a space where we can like hear about different people's bodies and experiences and what they're trying with the tools and how is it working, and you can try that, you know. So there's a lot of like peer learning in that space as well. So the logistics are, it's a 3-part workshop, very similar to the 3-part that you both have done. And but it's 2 hours, because we add on some, especially in the first session, really breaking down what is addiction, what is it not, really breaking down resilience and resilience in recovery and resilience determinants in recovery, like really looking at that sense of like how recovery is incomplete with a dysregulated nervous system. So how do we really think about recovery in this larger sense? And then we learn, you know, some science, some psychoeducation around the body and the nervous system. And then people leave with tools to practice, right? And then it really is about practice, practice, practice. We are more heavy probably than the one that you took on how do you make this a practice, and why is that super important? You know, because one thing about struggling with a substance use, I know, or a behavior compulsion, there can tend to be a little more fire under the ass of wanting to practice, because there's a real detriment to that behavior or that substance use. So there can be more motivation. And so what I love about the space there is that there is a real drive. People are like kind of ready to go and want to try it. And usually like, okay, like I'm desperate, you know, there's a sense of like, I've tried everything and is this going to work? So I love that about this space. Some of the content and the framework I work with obviously is the Resilience Toolkit that you all know. It's sort of this approach to dysregulation in the body, all very about internal resources, and then also allowing external resources to support that with the community that we build. And I base a lot of my framework on work by Dr. Gabor Mate, and some do a lot of research and reading about some of the newer science around addiction and recovery and substance use disorder. So that is all kind of woven in. So it's a more progressive stance. And I like to say, and I'll just add this and then we'll go into questions, is that the whole framework is meant to support whatever program you're in. So it is not about bashing AA by any means. It is about like really supporting whatever program is working for you if you're in one. And if that program didn't work for you, I got you. You know, I feel like it's really helping people who fall through those cracks and don't resonate with some of the 12-step model can find some solace here. And people who do resonate with the 12-step model can also find some extra support and foundation to make that program, I think, a lot more sustainable in terms of the other things you might be choosing. Because some of us who've been around recovery for a while know you get rid of one thing, you just got another one popping up. So to live a balanced whole life is really what we're after. So I think that covers that. We have some time for questions. Yeah, I think it is because one, you know, really what I've seen of these 3-part workshops, they're really one big argument of why should I practice tools in small increments throughout the day? Why is that actually going to help? So a reminder of that is always going to be beneficial. And there you will see some similarities in that sense. But I think the focus of in the second session, we really start to say, like, how can you use these tools now that you've had some time to practice them? And especially if you've been practicing since a further class, you're going to be farther along in the process. But if you have a strong relationship with these tools, let's get really curious about using one when you want to do the thing or use the thing. So we start to really experiment with like, what does it mean to, if I get that craving or that thought, or, you know, find myself picking my cuticles, can I pause, take a moment and try a tool and see if it either lessens the use or changes it altogether? So that's sort of a real focused conversation that you wouldn't have in the 3-part, right? Because we're not talking about that in there, but so we really dive into like, how can we apply this right now to our like real life circumstance with these behaviors and substances. And so, for example, I had one person anecdote of one of the workshops, and they were struggling with active marijuana use, and they really wanted to stop using it so much. They weren't sure that they wanted to quit, but they were like, it's really not working for me anymore. It was at the beginning of COVID. And so they couldn't find a tool that really worked for them. And then, and they felt like none of it was working. But in the second session, I met with them offline and we worked together until they found a tool that actually really they felt like a big, because, you know, we want something that's going to be like a narcotic. And unfortunately, a lot of this isn't like a shot or a narcotic, but getting to a place where you're aware that something does have an impact. I then said, you know, out of curiosity, why don't you just try it before you smoke next time? And they were like, okay, I think I can do that. I was like, you can still smoke. I'm not taking that away. Let's just see what happens. So they came back for the culminating week and said, you know, I did it and I smoked less. And then a week later, they wrote back and they said, you know, I quit. And they've stayed quit so far. And I think it's been about a year, a little over a year and a half, maybe. So just to say that's not everyone's story. I'm not saying that that's like a guarantee, but that's an example of applying this process and what is possible. Oh, no, you don't have to. Okay. You will get everything that you would get in the 3-part series, but like with extra. So it's like the 3-part series, but extra. Yes. So I really believe finding the right combination of supportive actions that could include this practice. It could also include, you know, some sort of medication. It could also include a group. It could also include a lot of things, right? It's one piece of it, but really getting curious and also like really understanding behavior change, I found to be pretty revolutionary, that some of the supportive actions that we think are going to help move us into action actually don't. So figuring out what's going to help get you to kind of really commit and know that that may shift and change, and you might return to another state or relapse to another stage of that in terms of getting ready to make this kind of commitment to yourself to really practice and want to do this. Like, that's an ongoing reflection that I don't find being discussed in many groups out there, because we have different like supportive actions that I feel like we all have unique supportive actions as well. That there are some generic supportive actions that are suggested, like journal or, you know, have external accountability or whatever it might be. But I think for some of us that it can be even a little more nuanced and a little more personalized, so that you're motivated in a way that you haven't been before. Having that kind of shame-free, non-judgmental space is really, really important to find your community or people that get you and you know, have that gallows humor about certain things. Like, you know, I know when I find other cuticle pickers and we can laugh about when you're, you know, the blood spurts out of your cuticle in the middle of a conversation and you're so horrified and wear your band-aids, you know, and it's like being able to share that is really helpful. I'll just add to, maybe people are thinking of some questions, because I was just thinking about a conversation I was listening to of Dr. Sapolsky of the Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And he was saying to, in this podcast, that he really was just passionately extolling the virtues of small practices throughout the day. And I've also heard another therapist I really like, Dr. Bruce Perry, talking about small therapeutic doses and like how there's so much benefit to that. And we really don't advocate for that enough in our culture. There's a lot of like, you know, 30-day rehab or ayahuasca or, you know, 10 years of therapy in 2 nights. You know, it's like, let's just get her done and get it fast. This is a slow process. It really is. I do keep in touch with a lot of the people who come through, because I'm always like, how's it going? Are you okay? What's working? What's not? You know, and let's tweak some things. Let's play. 11. And we have 5 scholarship spots in every group. They are completely free. It's like first come, first serve. So whoever signs up for those first, no questions asked, completely free. Otherwise, it's $210 for the 3 sessions. My loving criticism of cathartic or retreat mentality, right? Of healing, which is, it's incredible when you're in it. Like, I did ayahuasca for 2 nights, right? I had an incredible experience, but the integration afterwards is often left out, if done at all. And so how do you sustain also that high level of either emotional catharsis or that? And I did a lot of storytelling workshops for part of my career in prisons with men experiencing incarceration and also youth and probation camps. And I'll just say that there was a culture of that organization I was working for where they felt that the emotional catharsis was healing, that if people had big, feelings telling their stories, that was healing. And then I would see the people a lot of times, especially the youth, never come back, or if they come back, feel such a vulnerability, shame hangover that they never shared again. And so that does not, to me, feel like a healing experience. Healing to me is when you can slowly, bit by bit, integrate, have capacity. We build capacity for integration, basically, of these deeper sensations that are really hard to manage in day-to-day life. And, I'm first and foremost my whole family's in recovery. I was in my mother's womb when she went to AA for my father, Al-Anon, like we got it all. So I am, I also say, because I spent about 10 years as a pretty much a fundamentalist in AA, that I have a loving capacity to know where it supports and where it can also leave people out. Yeah, thank you. Really glad you were here. Share this with people you know. If you're curious, would love to see you in the workshop starting on Thursday. You can sign up. I'll put it in the link, the sign up in the chat. I'll put it in the link. I'll put it in the chat here. And if you know of anyone too that you think would benefit, please let them know and share this. We'll do another info session if this was useful. If you think this was helpful, we'd love your feedback. And yeah, just really grateful you're here. And I also feel a lot of tenderness and compassion for everything everyone's holding and what we're all struggling with. And just to say that you're not alone, and there is hope.